Are you familiar with T8F chains? Neither am I really. When I got into this hobby, I had no idea the sheer number of different chain types and of course all of the sprockets that are complementary to them. This bike comes with a T8F, which is surprising because that's one of the only metric chains out there. But that's all about to change. We're gonna convert this bike to something a lot better. You know, it's surprising to me just how many different chain types there are for bikes. In fact, I have 6 bikes right here and 6 different chain types. There's T8F, there's 219, there's 35, there's 420, 428, and 525. And there's more. There's 25, there's 40, there's 410, the list goes on. But most commonly on bikes like this is 35 chain, or 420 if you need something a little bit beefier, but I don't really think the power that comes out of this bike specifically really justifies a thick and beefy chain like that, even though this thing is now putting out a little bit more now that it's a 72 volt again. And having seen now that the Mototec 60 volt comes with 35 chain and sprocket options for this bike, I figured I'd make the jump to something a little bit more stronger and a little bit more available. I'm also going to be doing some much needed drivetrain maintenance to this thing because I've seen what happens when people ignore that, and oof. The first thing to do is step 1, remove the old stuff. And it's not just a chain and sprocket that we're dealing with here. This motor is not direct drive, it's actually a gear reduction. So it has this little piece right here, kind of a gearbox if you want to call it that. Basically, it's just an extra set of gears to connect the motor to the front sprocket, which is behind all of this. As a quick aside, this is what the motor looks like without that gear reduction and all that stuff on top of it. And this is why it's so difficult to find an aftermarket motor for these bikes, because this has a very unique spline pattern. Not only that, but because it has the gear reduction, it's placed in a different spot from the output shaft of this motor. So it makes it really difficult to find something that you could be able to just slap in there. There's definitely no plug and play options, at least that I'm aware of. So there's a lot of figuring out where things line up and how to be able to do that. I'm still trying to figure that out myself, but it's one of those things that hopefully something comes up and hopefully I think of something that we can actually replace this with. But for now, keeping this stock. So now we can start to see the differences here between old and new. This is the old one with the T8F, of course. This is the front sprocket, and this is a 19 tooth. And the funny thing was, comparing this to the new one, I knew that this one was going to have less teeth than the old one because it's a bigger chain, so it needs bigger spacing between those. But this one is actually a lot less than I thought. It's 15 tooth rather than 19 tooth. But that makes more sense, of course, when you look at the rears as well, because they also go down in size. The old one here is a 68 tooth, and the new one is a 56 tooth. Well, at least it would be. If you're buying these from Mototec directly, the only size that's available in 35 right now is the 56 tooth, but this one is a little bit less, exactly one less, a 55 tooth. I've actually had this sprocket laying around for a long time. This was for a project that never really came to fruition, so you never saw it, but it's good now because it's not going to waste. I got this from Battery Broker, not sponsored, but they have a ton of sprockets like this that are really high quality and all sorts of sizes too, so you can play with gear ratios. Speaking of gear ratio, even though both the front and the rear have less teeth with the new 35 size, they aren't reduced by the same amount. If you divide the number of teeth in the rear by the number of teeth in the front, you get the gear ratio, and the gear ratio has been increased. Basically, the higher the gear ratio, the more torque it has. The smaller the gear ratio, the more top speed it has. But I'm okay with that. I think it'd be fun to have a faster accelerating bike, although like I said, it does sacrifice the top speed a little bit, but it doesn't really matter when you have one of these. Did I mention that it has a 72 volt again? Oh, but I just did the decals not too long ago. It's already out of date. Whatever, let's go ahead and swap these out. But before we get into wrapping everything up and slapping new chains and sprockets on everything, we first need to address this little gear reduction here, and boy is it nasty. Yeah, it looks pretty nasty right here, and it could be worse if I'm honest. It could be that I'm dealing with too little grease rather than this scenario, which is a whole lot more. I guess this is a little bit of a learning experience because when I first got this bike, I knew that I needed to make sure that these gears inside of this box were well greased, and it looks like I made it a little too well greased. I did find afterwards that it was constantly leaking, and now I can see, because this is the back side of things, that is actually leaking from this port right here on the shaft to the motor and just pooling up in here rather than what I thought it was previously, which was this little bit right here that's sandwiched in and where I had originally put all the grease. I guess the moral of the story here is that a little bit goes a long way. So to get this thing in perfect working order, we're first gonna scrape out and clean up all of this old junky grease. Then we can open it up and see what's actually on the inside, because that's where it matters. Well, now that we got all that cleaned up, or at least as well as one could clean all of that up with that much grease spilling out of it, we can take a look at the gears here, and these are actually in really good shape. So I'm glad that I was at least over-greasing it rather than under-greasing it, because I've seen people under-grease it or just ignore this entirely. There's not that much grease in this from the factory, so always, always, always put some grease in this thing to make this thing last so that these gears don't wear out, because once these gears wear out, there goes your bike, and you got to replace those gears before you can ride the thing again. So how I have it positioned here is how you would see it on the bike, just without the cover. Cover's right here. Again, I got that as clean as I could, but it's okay. It's got a little bit of residual grease. We're gonna repack everything anyway. And one of the other things that you can see with this one, if I put it in the position where you would normally see it, is that right here is a little Zerk fitting. So you can actually attach a grease gun to this without even having to open anything up and just shoot a bunch of grease in there. Although I recommend, now that I know, to not shoot too much grease into that, because it will just bleed through right here and go out to the back where the shaft is for the motor. But since I have things open, I'm gonna take it one step further and actually pull out these gears and pack it with grease into the teeth, into the grooves right here. That way it has grease where it matters, rather than it just flinging around to the outsides, and it doesn't really make much contact with the actual moving parts. That's what matters here. The grease that I'm using, by the way, is this waterproof grease from Bel-Ray. I've had this laying around forever, and I've been using it for pretty much anything that moves on any of my bikes, but you could get away with any other kind of general purpose grease or any other type of waterproof grease. I highly recommend. That way it's thick enough and it stays around. But now that everything's properly greased, we'll put it back together. Now we got that all sandwiched together with some nice grease inside. We just need to add the front sprocket to the back side, which connects with just a snap ring. And connect it to the motor, of course. And throw the other sprocket on, of course. And throw the chain on, of course. I mean, just put everything else back together at this point. So the old chain did not have a master link. This one does, and because it has a master link, there is a thick part of the chain, and it's that part that is making noise and contact with this lower chain guard here. So I think I need to take that off as well, trim that up, or just leave it off entirely. I think I'm gonna trim it. I'm just gonna leave that chain guard off for now. Seems to work. So will the changes that we've made have any difference in the riding abilities of this bike? And that answer is, of course. According to Sprocket Calculator, this specific gearing setup is going to have a 2.4% increase in torque and loss in speed. Now, I don't know exactly the torque that this bike puts out, so I couldn't tell you offhand what that increase in the foot-pounds would actually be. However, based on the top speed that I've seen with this bike, I could approximate that the loss that we're going to see is almost exactly 1 mile an hour less. Definitely not enough to cry over, but it would still be cool to compare this against the old setup to see whether or not that was the case. If only I remembered to do that before I just did all of this.
Thankfully I did. I haven't done anything that you've seen previously. We're gonna get a baseline with the current setup, the current chain, and the current gearing. So we'll just start here and get an acceleration, and then we'll see what our top speed is at the end of the run. All right, 3, 2, 1. I think we hit our mark. And end of the block. Brake, 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 brake. I forgot how zippy this bike is and just how kind of sketchy it feels when you put a 72 volt in it. All right, 40 miles an hour it shows here. We'll look at the video and I'll put a timestamp down there as far as acceleration to where I felt like we kind of hit that max. I mean, it's pretty zippy already, so I'm curious to see what the new gearing will do. Now we're back to the present, which, as you're watching, this is actually the past. YouTube is such a weird timeline. But we're going to start at the exact same spot. We'll see when it hits its top speed after its acceleration bit, and then what the ultimate top speed is once we get to the end of the block. 3, 2, 1. Whoa! That's got more. There. We hit our acceleration point at that. Now to see where we get top speed wise. Fully pinned. And brake. I'm not exactly sure what 2.4% increase in torque actually is, but man, does that feel like a lot. But now to see our top speed. Did we get 39 miles an hour? No, We got 42.
Okay, so ignore everything that I said previously, I guess. This new gearing setup is not only quicker, but faster too. That's what I get, I guess, for just recording the before scenario once and just going with what I recorded. It shouldn't be that way. Trust me, this bike is slower now. But if we're still pulling 42 miles an hour, who cares about losing 1 mile an hour? That's nothing. What's not nothing is the acceleration feel that this provides. Again, in my hasty testing method, I didn't really accurately portray this, but trust me, it's felt for sure. And there's still the opportunity to make this bike even torquier than it is now, because with a 55 tooth on the rear currently, that's one of the smaller sprockets that are available. So I could easily step this up and increase the torque even further. Like a 60 tooth, for example, that would actually increase the torque to 10% over the stock setup. Or if I was absolutely insane and crazy, I could get their biggest sprocket available, which is a whopping 77 teeth, and that would increase the torque by a whopping 30%. But that's ridiculous. No one would be that dumb to put a sprocket that big on a bike this small, right? No one wants to see a YouTube video like that, right? You know what would be really dumb though, is ignoring the maintenance to your gear reduction. If you take anything away from this video, it's grease your gears.